Let's say that we want to improve the search feature on the Facebook app to improve search results for people looking for things to do in San Francisco. What would you investigate and what metrics would you come up with to understand if the current functionality in the search was performing well? Hi, I'm Zarar. I'm one of the coaches at Interview Query. I'm a data scientist. So today we'll be asking how to improve search results. And so now I'll give it off to Lee, who will answer this question.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Lee. I'm also a data scientist working for a ride-sharing company right now. So I think the first question I have is about the clarifying questions I have. First of all, understand like how does the search feature work? What kinds of results are returned? I believe that, like is it on one of the main page or is it on like a sub page, right? For example, that's my first question. How does it work? Secondly, like I want to understand like why is this specific to SF? I just want to have some more background information, so maybe that can be helpful to guide my thought process.
Yeah, those are good questions. So let's say we're interested in the main app page you can search, but the search triggers kind of a travel module, if you will, and then that's what's used to deliver the results for things to do in SF. There's some kind of submodule that deals with travel. And then why is it only for San Francisco? I think, maybe say you can imagine there's some current concern about the search results from San Francisco. Qualitatively, we're getting feedback from customers that it's not good and it's not working well for them. They don't find the results are working well, but they used to say work well, but now they aren't. Yeah, so maybe in this example, you can imagine it's customer feedback.
Okay, based on customer feedback.
Yeah, so qualitative, but yeah, not quantitative.
Qualitative. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think thanks for all the contextual updates. And also when you search the feature, does it only return travel module, also returns other relevant things like people, pages. You basically tell me that you can click on the travel module, right? As one of the potential output, right? But that's not necessarily like the only output, right, related to traveling. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how the Facebook app specifically works, but I'm just going to answer kind of this question like as a generic thing. Yeah, so basically it'll understand the intent, that the intent is for travel and for San Francisco, and then it will show those results first. Yeah, I guess those results will be shown first.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay. First step is to sort of like confirm, right? Or find, quantitative evidence to show that this is a real problem, especially in SF. Okay. Number two, given that one is correct, right? What are the things that we can do to improve the search result? Do you think this is a good plan?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, I think like let's focus on one for now, right? I think we can sort of rephrase this question that like how to verify, the search quality of SF, is bad, right? I believe that happened recently, right?
Yeah,
I guess like
in this example, let's say in the past month, let's say.
Okay. So I think like let's take a step back, understand like what this feature is trying to do. And when we launch this feature, like what we're trying to accomplish, right? Like how do we measure success? And then let's think those criteria and then come up with like relevant matrix to sort of like capture the quality in each of these areas. Okay. So I think like number one like goal is sort of increase engagement, right? Basically like this is like one more stop, for the users to shop on the app, right? To look at feeds, right? But this is more like related to like search for content, right? So this is like one more stop for you to spend time on the app, right? And number two is to sort of another success criteria of the search feature. I think it will be a relevancy, right? Like, are we showing the relevant results? So yeah, you definitely want to search something and show you that it's very personalized or very interesting to you, so that you click on it, be very interested in it, right? So that's number two things I want to check. Number three, I think it would be like the retention of this feature, right? Like, do people come back, consistently, right, to use this feature, right?
Right.
And I think the last one I want to check, it's like whether like we have a really good like search experience related to the search time, right? Like what is the latency? Does it return the result very quickly? Yeah. So I think these will be like good four things we want to check, right? You agree, disagree, or have more things to add?
No, that's great.
Okay. And the next step would be coming up with the matrix, quantify like how well we're doing on these sort of categories, like each individual category.
Yeah, those four categories. Yeah, I think those really cover a good amount.
Yeah. So I think Actually, I want to switch gear. I want to focus on things that sort of easy to check first, right? I feel like I want to focus on B and C specifically because they're a lot easier to check. And I think it's a
Okay.
lot in this case, right? Because when it comes to relevancy, I think I want to see like click-through rate, like after basically defined as like number of searches with, clicking on the result divided by a number of search queries. Okay. That sort of tell us like how many searches end up being like clicked on. We'll find that the results are relevant. Okay, that's
Right.
one matrix to come up with. And latency, it's very easy, right? Like you can sort of hopefully we lock this somewhere, which is the average MS per search. Okay, and actually we can also do A. Actually, it should be very easy. It's a number of searches divided by number of users, right? Basically tells the average searches per user. And I sort of want to focus on the SF audience, right? Because this question is very specific to SF. Let's focus on SF, but we can sort of extend this framework to the audience as well, right? So we can sort of compare like how these metrics change over time to really make sure that like it's actually not specific to the SF audience, but it's more like a platform-wise problem, right? So a dimension I want to check either is SF versus non-SF. Okay, so these are the things that I want to check. And actually, I just think of one more, which is the UI, right? I'm not sure like you could have some bugs or changes in the UI, right? And so you might have issue there, but you don't know, right? So one thing we can check the UI quality is checking the funnel of the search features, right? Like basically how many number of people click on it, right? And then like type result, right? And then like click search, right? Return result, and then click on the result, right? So this is like much more general framework to have like funnel perspective on how the search quality changes over time as well. Okay, does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned the dimensions as SF versus non-SF, and then in your question, you mentioned looking at in the recent weeks. So is time also another dimension you're looking at, or?
Yeah, certainly, right? You mentioned that like it has gone down recently. I think
Yeah.
we certainly like time perspective, right?
Okay.
To sort of like see like whether like this is like a very like big drop, right?
Right.
To make sure that like this is not something happen over the night, right? Is it gradual, is it sudden, right? Like putting like a time perspective of these matrix, it's also very important as well, right?
Okay.
And we can also try to find like alignment with the time we started seeing all these like feedbacks from the customer, right? To see if they have agreement with the matrix,
Right.
right? Just like to have like extra data points. Yep.
Okay, sounds good.
So yeah, so what do you want to do next, right? So basically we have come up with all these, criterias,
Yeah.
relevant matrix dimension, right? I think the next step is really to sort of have like a time series perspective of these matrix to
Okay.
see if actually like, fall under, right? I also want to add one more thing, add one more dimension I just noticed. It is comparing users who submitted the feedback, okay, versus who don't, right?
Right.
Because it's possible that like you might be able to find like common traits of these users, right? It's certainly possible that like this user like represent like a small subset of user, so that when you look at the global average, it's hard to capture, right?
Hmm.
So this breakdown can be even more specific about the
Hmm.
potential people who get affected,
Hmm.
right? And maybe these people have similarity on like the device type, right? The app
Hmm.
version and et cetera, right? Yeah, I think these would be like good things to check, right?
Okay.
Potential, collaboration with app version, device type, and OS version, for example, right?
Yeah, that sounds good. The one other question I might have here is how would you know? I mean, now you have all these measures. Is there some way that you would know that something is wrong or not?
Yeah, something's wrong. So yeah, to be
Like
honest, like
you have these different measures, you have these different
yeah.
dimensions. Is there like how would you tell? Just like by plotting it, or like what would you do to tell
Yeah,
if there's
good question. Yeah, like we usually just plot it, right?
yeah.
If something's really bad, you can spot it, right? Like it's like a big
Okay.
drop, right? But if
Okay.
something a little bit more gradual, I think it will be a little bit tricky to tell.
Okay.
But I think there are different ways to you can do it. Number one, like you can do like some kind of smoothing, right? Like exponential or moving average to sort of like remove the noise to make sure that after averaging the series, it looks more normal. It's still within the previous high, previous low, right? So
Mhm.
that makes sense. And number two, you can use like more like a statistical driven method, right?
Right.
Calculate the mean fluctuation. You can calculate like a Bollinger Band, for example, right? Which is
Okay.
the moving standard deviation, and then make sure that it's still like within two standard deviation, for example, right? That
Okay.
sort of helps specify like whether this is happened by chance or it's
Right.
actually real, right? So this is how we look into it.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good.
Yeah, something like Bollinger Band.
Yeah. So now we can move, I guess we can move on to let's assume that, we do find something in this first step, which shows that there's a,
Yeah.
drop in engagement, and let's say there's a drop in relevancy. Latency seems to be fine, but there's a drop in engagement and relevancy for that particular search, just for that search, let's say. Yeah.
Okay.
Just for the search of San Francisco.
Okay. Just for the search in San Francisco. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So
So let's say like you basically number of searches per user have gone down, through rate has gone down,
yeah,
right? And the next step is basically like I feel like the next step is actually to have an even deeper understanding on what's driving the decrease of A and B. Okay, right?
right.
And then let's focus on finding the root cause for that, and we can think about how to improve it, right?
Okay.
So let's focus on the engagement side first, okay?
Okay.
So I feel like these two things are sort of correlated, to be honest. Like if your search it's pretty bad, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of like people will search less as well, right?
Right.
So I think this is something I want to check. Yeah. So I think it's safe to sort of make assumption that the decrease of relevancy is the driver of the engagement,
Right.
Or actually, you can even check that, right? You can check like percent of users making at least one search,
Right.
over time. I want to introduce one more metric here, right? Because I need to search at least one to really know that it's actually really bad relevancy, right? So let's track that to make sure like absolute user basis who actually try to use this feature, has it gone up or gone down, or are they consistent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's consistent and it tells us that relevancy has gone down, then it's sort of it's the main driver is still the click-through rate, right? The relevancy, right? Then we can focus on being the root cause.
Yeah, so let's say it's a good point. And so let's say you do that and you find, it's mainly the relevancy that's the factor.
Okay. Okay, then I would think of like any things that like could potentially change the relevancy, right? Again, like I want to check like a time series perspective as well, right? Like things I want to check, right? Like when did it happen, right? And how much did it change, right? I know we did this already, right? But I think it would be good to have like a ballpark percentage wise, like how much it has gone down, right? If this is something about if it's more gradual then, or if something more sudden, right? It sort of imply different things, right? So can you like whether like the drop it's like gradual or sudden to just to have more clarifying, context on this part.
So yeah, let's say you find that the drop seems more gradual.
Okay, gradual. Okay.
Yeah, but I guess it seems to be with greater increase closer to time. So it's gradual, but then the difference is becoming more and more worse closer to time.
Okay. More and more worse closer to time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So
by worse, I just mean compared to like, non-SF traffic, because that was one of your dimensions is SF versus non-SF. So let's just say the SF1 compared to non-SF click-through rate is kind of progressively getting worse and worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, and we check the funnel, right? Like we check the funnel, the number of people clicking is the same, right? Percent of time results the same, right? The only difference is that like they click on the search and then the result.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay.
Yeah. So let's say it's at the search part. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And latency is fine. Okay. I think like number one thought I have is like, did we do any kind of like changes on the search algorithm? Okay. Did we make an update on the search algorithm, for example? Right.
Yeah.
Like basically like how do we, take the input of the query, right? And then sort of like change it, right? So that sort of tell me, did we make an update to that, right? So hopefully it's actually within a raw, like really bad algo, right? That sort of make it worse, right?
Okay.
I think another thing I want to check is also, I'm not sure this is even possible, like the topics, right, that people are searching. Like for example, people search different keywords, we can put them into themes, right? I want to see if there any drift into that on that perspective. Sort of like topic modeling, for example, right? Like, but I'm not sure if this is possible based on the data we have. But my idea is to see if there's like any drift on the themes and trends, right? Because you can imagine like, it would be more useful to search like traveling or social stuff on Facebook. But if you ask like how do you go to the hospital in SF, right? Like that's not possible. I mean, it's still possible, but maybe less relevant, right? So I just want to see if there's any drift on that regard as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's one more thing I want to check. Yeah, and third, I want to check it's not relevant to the search algorithm. It's sort of like checking like whether our ranking algorithm prediction have an output that has drifted, right? So under the search algorithm, right, like I'm pretty sure there's some way of quantifying like how relevant it is, right? And they want to put the most relevant on top, right? I sort of want to see like whether the average prediction score has changed or not, right? Because if it's actually changing, right, let's say it has gone down, right? Then it is expected that like the relevancy will be going down as well, right? Because it
Mhm.
just means that the model is performing worse. Okay. So this would tell us like, is the model performing worse, right?
Yeah.
So this is sort of like a follow-up question with the first one, to be honest, right? But it's also not the same because you can also not make a change to the algorithm, but it just deteriorate over time, right? That's also possible, right? So if this turned out to be the case, right, then we can also check like the future pipelines as well, right?
Yeah.
Whether like did the user base change, right? Also like the any kind of the features that I use, have the drift or not, right? So we can also like sort of quantify that. Yeah, and then I think number four would be like, are there any things that are specifically happening in SF, okay, during the
Right.
period of decline? Yeah,
Yeah.
like
So
why do you think it's potentially possible? It's because you could have like a major like parade or like some kind of political events in SF, right? Some kind of like international meetings, right? That sort of like take all the headlines, right? So that sort of would change the search results. So yeah, I just want to see if there's anything that's happening specifically during the period of decline. And the tricky part is that like this is somewhat hard to quantify. Yeah, I think it would be helpful to sort of like get this data by looking at external data as well to have like cross-reference. Okay. Yeah, so I think these are things I sort of want to track in terms of relevancy. Are there any things that you think I missed or you want to add on?
No, I think those things are good. I think you mentioned about trying to improve the algorithm. So maybe I can give you something more specific here to do that. I think the last part you had was to how could you improve it? So say the scenarios that you were looking at things in SF and one thing, and you were looking at algorithmic changes, and you find out that Facebook had made it easier, particularly in San Francisco, for other businesses or other places to add pages. The details don't matter, but the point is that it was easier for them to add pages and more people were starting to add pages that were then being indexed into the search results. And it seems like, you have this topic modeling. So it seems like, that's the reason for the decline. There's basically more pages being created. It's easier to make the
Okay.
pages and more people are making the pages for SF and that's causing the decline.
Okay.
So
I
say
see.
if that's the issue. Basically, there's lower quality pages in the index because a lot of new people are creating pages.
Okay.
So say, yeah,
I
imagine
see.
if you had that as the scenario. So how might you improve the algorithm?
Okay. How will I improve the algorithm? Okay. So let's say that's the case. How to improve the algorithm? Yeah, I think on a high level, like I have two things coming on my mind, right? Like number one, it's sort of like add more features, right? Or another algorithm to sort of like rank these pages by relevancy, right? And then we only fit in the most relevant pages into the model, right? As a
Mhm.
search result, right? And number two, it's to sort of like enforce some kind of diversity from the output. So given like the pages, that we created, let's only focus on returning the top 10. Okay, for example, right? That's slightly different approach than the first one, right? The first approach is more about like having after the ranking you put into the model. Second one is that like you have the output but you rank it, right? So yeah, these are two things that come up to my mind. Yeah, and also I feel like so if our algorithm pipeline is set up properly, right? We should be able to learn the behavior of these new pages quite quickly, to be honest, right? The algorithm should be adaptive, right, over time, right? Maybe we train the model every week or every 2 weeks,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Maybe initially, you see the decline, right? But afterward, like we'll start learning the patterns of these
Right.
pages not being good, right? Then we should stop showing these results. Yeah. So the number one method is more like quick fix, right? You want to fix it right now. But number two, it's more like you don't do anything right now, and so let the model sort of like absorb it and learn the
Hmm.
pattern over time,
Hmm.
which might take some time, right? So yeah, I think these are two things that you can potentially do to address this concern.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one more thing is that like another question kind of related, right? But not specific for the algorithm part, but like I want to understand like why are so many pages have been created out of a sudden, right? Like did it happen like recently, right? Maybe like there are some part of the system that, have gone wrong, right? Did we do a good job of sort of like
Hmm.
guardrailing these bad,
Right.
right? Should we like increase the criteria or make it more strict for people to create new pages, right? And so I want to see that end as well to make sure that it's actually not really affecting not just the search algorithm, but also the other news feed, right? And the issue could be potentially greater than just a search feature as well, right? This is something that I also want to, check as well, not just the algorithm part.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, are there any follow-ups on this?
And no, I mean, I think you went through everything. Maybe the only thing I'd ask is if you have any kind of summary, like how would you summarize basically what you've done so far? Say,
Yeah.
you want to have something to send to some stakeholders. So
Yeah, for sure. So let's have a high-level view of the problem again, right? The problem is that like we receive a lot of feedbacks from people in the SF saying that the search quality has gone down, right? And then the follow-up actions we have taken is to break into two steps, right? Number one, finding evidence to show that this is actually a real problem, right? Number two, we have verified that it's a real problem, right? And what are we trying to or planning to do next to address this concern? We got the first step, right? We try to find evidence by coming up with a list of metrics that are relevant to evaluate search quality, right? These are searches per user, click-through rates of the searches, latency, and the funnel of using the search feature, right? And then we'll also break down the dimension by SF versus non-SF and see the result over time. Okay. And it turns out that what we find was that the relevancy has gone down. It's the main driver of this issue. And then we also further find out that it was due to more pages being created. These pages are less relevant created by new business, right? Which diluted the result of the search quality. Okay. And we have two follow-up actions, potential options, right? This is not finalized, right? Number one is to put a stricter ranking on the number of pages returned, right? Either limit the number of results returned on the pages or limit of number of pages going into the ranking model, right? And number two is sort of don't do anything and let the model sort of absorb it and learn a pattern over time, right? Depending on how bad it actually has declined, right? Finally, we want to make sure that like there's no other like bigger problem. Are there any changes in the system or any like bots that are sort of creating like a lot new pages for various bad reasons, right? We want to make sure that this is not only like diluting, the search result. We want to make sure it's also not diluting the news feed, for example, right? News feed, maybe even like other apps like Instagram, for example, right? I want to work with, cross-functional partner to make sure that this is not the case. So to limit the impact of this, observation, or at least make sure that there's no impact based on the observation that we're seeing right now.
yeah, that sounds good. Did you want to enter improve the algorithm? I think you had 2 points, right?
Yeah, I have the 2 points. Yeah, number one, I'm gonna type it here, so it's easier to follow, right? Restrict a number of pages, right, into the search algorithm, right, which requires a separate model to rank the pages, right? Number two, it's basically like fix the number of pages returned, right, from the search algorithm. From the search output, which also requires a separate model, right? And number three would be not do anything and let the algorithm learns the pattern based on users click-through rates, pattern, right? But that depends on,
But the third thing is not necessarily not do anything. It's basically you're just saying let the model retrain based on your data, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's still
basically not do anything to the algo structure or
yes, but I think your point just is if I get it, all you need to do is retrain the model with newer data. It's possible we already have something, but like right.
Or let it be done automatically, right?
Oh, exactly.
Right. We click the button, let it return, right? To see what actually makes a difference.
Exactly. Okay.
So that basically summarizes my approach to this hypothetical problem. Yeah.
Great. So so I guess I can go through maybe my feedback on it. So I mean, I thought it was a pretty good job. I really liked at the very beginning, you went through, you thought of the key questions to ask. And I think you only asked 2 questions, but I think they really got to the heart of it and they allowed you to quickly focus on what mattered. So I thought that was good. I thought you really went through a lot of the possibilities of what could be wrong. So I thought that was very good as well. And then, you went through the drivers for why, we ended up finding out one of the things was the problem. And you really went through what the different drivers of the problem were, which was also very good. I thought at the end, just with the improving the algorithm, I think the results were good, but I just think Some of it could have been a little clearer. I think one thing you could have asked was what the algorithm was.
Okay.
I mean, I guess I could have said it too, but because it could have been anything, right? And so say if I had said, so usually, and people, depending on the search you use, you might have a two-stage ranker. You have some tree-based model, and then you have some like burp-based model. I mean, it varies, the details vary, but say you have those
Mm.
two. So with the relevancy, the second stage model should solve it. But say if I don't have a second stage model, I just have a tree-based model, then it could be the case that having a burp-based model would resolve the quality issue, mostly because those models are, they're looking at the meaning of what's being said or what's on the pages. So those should be better at, say, resolving the quality. So say if I had said that we only have like a tree-based ranker and not like a second stage ranker, then you could have said, well, maybe you need to add this second stage ranker.
Mm.
Yeah, so that could be one way. Another way of improving it, given that the issue is one of quality of the pages, you could have some other model,
Yeah.
right, that's run that's also somewhat like a BERT-based kind of transformer type of model that is trained about quality, right? That tells you,
Yeah.
is this relevant or irrelevant given this query? And you can even train that
Yeah.
offline, and then you can provide those scores to the
Yeah.
like. So if you don't have the second stage ranker, if you have the first stage that's a tree-based model, you could provide those relevancy scores, or you could have that model also. I think you already kind of mentioned this. Like this could be a broader issue, so that model could flag pages that are like really bad, right? That need to be looked at. So you could have something like that. So
Yeah, I think one more thing just come to mind right now. It's not just on the algorithm side, right?
yeah.
Also on the
Mhm.
UI side, returning different numbers of result, right? Maybe grouping the result differently as well, right? That can be potentially a different way to address this issue as well, right?
What do you mean by group them differently? Like you say what category each is for?
Based on different category, group them differently, rank them differently, and maybe extend the return list to be longer, right? Like I think this is also a possible change you can do,
Mhm.
but not algorithm side, but it's more on the on the UI side, right?
Yeah.
But again, the core is the algorithm like you mentioned, but that's just like another perspective we can do as well.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Oh, the other thing that reminded me of one other point on the relevancy, I guess you could have also, given the way you had framed the problem, is looked at like the position
Mm.
of what was first clicked as like, which is also
Yeah.
called the mean reciprocal rank. So you just, the inverse of the position gives a score. And so if customers tend to be clicking on something that's like really far down, then we would know, and you could use that as well, in addition to click-through rate. But that would give a measure of effort in a way, because if someone has to really go through many results, then they're potentially putting more effort in. So that could be, and that might relate to, yeah, anyway. So that's one other thing I think
Mm.
you mentioned. But yeah, otherwise I thought it was really good. I mean, like I said, I think the big thing is you seem to really explore all the possibilities pretty well,
Yeah.
at each point of the problem. So I think that was pretty good. And I think, like you said, the clarifying problems allowed you to hone in on why is this important and why does it matter. So I thought that was good as well. So yeah, overall it's pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the feedback. So, yeah, I really liked the extra feedback you give me on, especially on the algorithm debugging side. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's solid. Yep. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much.